Hey y'all, I've gotten my Nix configurations working fairly reliably, and I thought I'd give everybody a tour. By Nix configurations, I mean the configurations for my computers, and I have a few different computers I manage just around my house. These are the general computers. Some of these are like a kind of file server, my main desktop, developer kind of server, um, and this is actually a bunch of Raspberry Pi images. It's actually 7 of them. And then my RetroArch uh, desktop, sorry, not desktop, TV computer. These are all done using Colmena by Zhao Feng. Uh, really nice, quite like it. It is a simple stateless NixOS deployment tool. And yeah, it is, I think, fairly simple, definitely good for what it does. And I'll show you guys what that is in just a moment. This is the declaration of your systems for a Colmena. It looks somewhat like NixOps, where you're defining your entire network or all systems just at the top level here. This is just something that functional systems are doing really well at, that is really valuable for understanding and presenting a system. Notice I didn't go anywhere deep into some file stack or like source slash blah 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 to get to some main or find a configure or whatever to find out what is it that is part of my system, not what's part of a framework. Yeah, and if you're like, oh, what is this system right here? Just go straight into the Hive, and right at the top here, I'm able to define some unique aspects about my systems. This isn't unique to Colmena. This is something that pure functional systems are just really good at. And I always appreciate seeing systems that follow that. Anyways, this is kind of your top level topology of all your systems here. And you can see the computers I just mentioned are also mentioned here. OGG, GLONASS, my desktop, GUR, Thrash, but there's also those pies that I mentioned, and they're all post pi something. That's just the domain I'm using for them, and there's 7 of them, and this is something that was pretty neat to be able to do, where each of these 7 Raspberry Pis have a unique disk image. So I just burn that Raspberry Pi's disk image to the Raspberry Pi, and there's no further setup. I don't need to do anything really. It just boots up exactly with its unique host name, and if I have any other unique packages for that specific Raspberry Pi, this makes it fairly easy. And this just defines each one of those computers' configs, the important imports and some important top level config. The top level config I like here, of course, is the host name, the system state version, great to put up here, and a few things specific to the deployment of that. And this deployment thing is a configuration that is specific to Colmena. I'll go over quickly how I use this and then just touch on the interesting bits of the configuration. Using this, I have my checkout here, and I have a shell.nix here that adds Colmena to the environment. Once I'm in the shell, I have Colmena available and those aliases, build, and apply. And I'm just going to show the full ones here. Build pretty much does what it says on the tin, builds, and I'll do this for just one of them. Computer Thrash, which is my media computer RetroArch machine. Do what it is. What's this doing is building everything according to that hive.nix, and specifically only building, though, the Thrash node. So that's one of 11 hosts. Oh, what did I say? 12. Right, that's done. And I typically build it like this when I'm doing development, and I target one specific host. You can build all nodes all at once. However, it takes a bit, so I generally just build one at a time until I get whatever change I'm working on functional, and then I will actually build all of them. And that's just building it, getting me the image. What I actually want after that is to apply the new Nix config. And this is connecting over SSH, which I have my keys set up appropriately. So it'll just go copy the NixOS configuration over and apply it. And this node Thrash, I really aimed for having a console-like experience with it. So I'm just remotely updating it here, you can imagine. And I have this run on a schedule, so it does fairly well. And you can see it's copying over, applying the system closure, blah blah. Yep, and that's generally how I use it. And this is all standard Colmena, I think. I'm not totally sure how other people have used Colmena specifically. I just got my legacy configuration updated and stabled, and so I'm curious how other people are using it. I don't use Home Manager, for instance. I think that would be another interesting thing. Or Flakes. I haven't learned those yet, so I know those are relevant as well. So this is all fairly standard. So I'll just give it a little tour of some interesting things or how I organize the rest of my config. And I'll cover Thrash and maybe yeah, I'll just mostly cover Thrash. I think that's the most interesting one. Here we are back in the hive.nix. And I'm going to ignore this part for a bit. We'll get back to it. But breaking this down, we have what's the Nix packages all these systems are going to use. And I use a submodule checkout of Nix packages. And this is just tracking my own fork, which I integrate against, I'm going to have to check here, 22.11 with some additional patches on top. I've been trying to avoid running my own fork of Nix packages, and I'm trying to work more towards using overlays to achieve the same effect. Get back to the hive.nix, running my own checkout of Nix packages, and then provided by Colmena, there's a defaults section, and this is, well, the defaults that apply to all the nodes. And for my systems, I have the defaults divided into two different chunks. One is the subfolder defaults, which is, well, things that are always enabled or at least default to enabled. They could be disabled, but at least default. And then modules that are always disabled that are available for the individual nodes to enable or disable. And then the rest of the Colmena config is each of those individual nodes. Like I mentioned, the host name, the state version, maybe a few top level config stuff, but generally just imports a config named after that node. The Raspberry Pi images are a bit interesting because there's 7 of them, and what this does is, well, this is just Nix. It's just another Nix expression here. So if we want to build this structure, which each one of these attributes is a node in the system, and we wanted to add a node for each of our Raspberry Pis, well, that's to merge in a structure, a structure with attributes of generated IDs and each of the configs being, templated off of this. And yeah, this ends up with each one of those Raspberry Pis being an individual node in the Hive, and each one having its individual disk image, which once burned to the Raspberry Pi, will make it just boot exactly how it should be. No additional configuration at all. It'll have the right host names, any individual services will be right, everything fairly straightforward. I can still SSH in to these and update them, but well, they're Raspberry Pis. So that is pretty handy because this is just a Nix expression that you can do these type of things. You don't have to, enumerate everything out like this. You can generate some other stuff. Defaults, I'm going to briefly go over that I use, and then modules are probably a bit more interesting. Defaults, I think the only one of particular interest is how I manage NixPath. For NixPath, I have it set NixOS, Nix packages, and Nix packages overlays to essentially this code. So NixOS, once I push a new NixOS configuration, it's always going to point to the code for that pushed NixOS configuration. Same with Nix packages, and same with Nix packages overlays. The Nix packages one, I think this helps keep your interactively installed Nix packages in sync. I think that avoids some weirdness that I've run into, and yeah, it works out okay. I'm not going to say it works great, but it works okay. It avoids some weirdness and adds a bit of other stuff. I would be curious to try Flakes. I think From the brief bit I've read, I think that's just a better overall approach to this kind of thing. And there's also Home Manager, which sounds interesting in its own right. But this is what I do, and of course, this is Nix, so nothing's stopping you from having these config be functions of whatever you want, even of the config itself or the packages itself, because we have that wonderfully lazily evaluated fixed point provided to us, which, yeah, try to figure that one out in some other system. I don't know. That would be painful. But it's really easy in this pure functional sense. You're just like, oh yeah, we just do a fixed point and pass the config and packages in. Why not? That's it. And then we can, reference those where we need them. And it all just works out. It's great. Yeah. And then the modules I have are the unique aspects of my individual systems. There's individual bits here that do specific things for each one of my computers. I think it's worth touching on what a computer config looks like before I go into those to why I have it structured that way. This is Thrash, like I mentioned. It's my media computer. I aim for a very console-like experience with this one. And I have it broken up into its hardware configuration, and I'm running this UM350 from Mini's forum, which is a pretty slick, like Mac Mini-esque system. And what it provides on the network, what its domain is, its file system, audio and video. Um, those aren't particularly interesting. They're pretty much what they say. If you use this hardware, this is worth checking out. This way of describing my network and domains, it works for me. I'd be curious to see how other people do this, where I have each one of my networks and what kind of hosts and resources there are on that network linked into the individual computers, so I can logically think about my network as um, groups with hosts and resources, and then reference those from my individual computer configs that provide those hosts and resources, and then what domain it's part of. But down here is kind of where I'm trying to adhere to only showing enable and disable settings here. None of this type of thing where I have some config in here beyond just enable or disable. Because I think with just this, trying to stick with just enables and disables of services or features at this level, I think it gives a very nice high level summary of what is the unique aspect of that particular node. And here we can see some aspects there. So what are those modules? Well, there's the standard NixOS ones, and there's the additional ones I have. Pretty useful for me. They're not particularly generic. They're fairly specific to whatever a computer specific node's trying to do. This one's status TTY. This starts up, ATOP as a systemd service that just attaches to TTY1, and I have a wee little monitor somewhere attached to that. So I have just a little physical monitor showing ATOP all the time, and I can just look at that to get an idea of what the load is on that server. I don't really think that's necessary, but it looks cool, and it's fun. So totally went for it. And adding and doing stuff with systemd in NixOS is the best. It is just the right combo for systemd. I don't know how people do it otherwise. Systemd, I'm fine with. I think it's a great way to compose services, to build systems. It has a lot of interesting features that make it very robust. And through NixOS, it works really well. I think it's just the right combo. I'm sure people will disagree. That's fine. NixOS is so composable. You can rock whatever combo you want. It'll work out for you. But it's pretty straightforward to just be like, oh, I want a new service that does blah blah blah, and there you go. Speaking of services, one of my systems was a self-contained electronics workbench power supply with a what is it called, an Atomic Pi hooked up to it. And I use this for a variety of electronic products because it has a 5 volt, 12 volt variable power supply, and then the Atomic Pi is hooked up to it, which has GPIO and some other stuff. That one I haven't ported to my new module setup yet. It would be really small though. I last time I was using it, it was to monitor some plants, and I had it hooked up to a Atmega Mega, I think it was, Arduino that monitored the atmosphere and controlled the lights for the plants. And here you can just see a systemd service that catted what was from the TTY. So this is the serial port hooked up to the Arduino, which I spat out my metrics on. And yeah, that's about it. All it did is cat it to the journals, essentially monitored it via journal D, and had something that consumed the journal to do some analytics on it. And it was a fun one. I don't use it anymore. It's way overkill for growing some plants. But I also had it just for fun, take screen pictures of the plants growing to make some cool time lapse. But you can see it's kind of an appliance like application. All that computer did was run these services. And on that computer, I had this Atmo monitor enabled, and this was the system it ran. And is this just configuration, or are you building software here? Because you are building together a composition of code. Well, this is just shell code that's combining some software together. But where does that fall if you can just drop down into your language from Nix directly? So it's pretty fun to build little systems like that, and ends up being very appliance like. The other appliance that I have that I quite like is this Thrash, which is my RetroArch system. So again, I want this to be like a console. So turn it on, it goes to RetroArch. Turn it off, should be easy. Anything goes wrong, it should be easy to recover. And NixOS makes that pretty easy. It's configured with RetroNix, which is a module I threw together to just run RetroArch as the only desktop on a NixOS service. And it's not too hard to do this. And what this ends up doing is when the system boots up, it's going to pick the default desktop manager. And in this case, the default desktop manager is RetroNix. And all this is going to do is start RetroArch. So whenever the desktop manager starts up, systemd desktop manager, it's always going to be RetroArch. And yeah, it makes it very console-like. In addition, I have a pad control system, which adds a daemon called command on event, which will listen for events from the controllers. And after 5 seconds of one button, it'll restart the display manager. And after 10 seconds, it'll reboot the system. And this is running separate from RetroArch. So if RetroArch, freezes, or one of the emulator freezes, or whatever, I can just hold down a button for a while and usually get out of it. And in fact, this has always worked so far. Yeah, and of course with Colmena and NixOS to update my console-like system, we just do this, and it'll get it to its declarative setup as we have it here. There's a few other things that are pretty fun in this. I'm going to put the link in the description down below. Feel free to poke around. Sway Gnome is what my desktop runs, and it's me trying to smash the Gnome session on top of Sway, or Sway inside the Gnome session. And yeah, it works okay. It's not quite there. Yeah, it works okay. I've been using it for a while. And yeah, but that's also just a Nix module, so it's just something I can turn on or turn off in a declarative fashion, and it does the right thing. So pretty fun. I definitely enjoyed Colmena. I think it's a good balance for the home labs in terms of features and complexity. So definitely check it out.